Yeah.
Okay. And why don't you introduce yourself and just give us your name and what you do now and a little bit about your family currently.
I'm Ed Stewart, born and raised in Crawfordsville. I graduated from Wayne High School. I own and operate Eastside Auto Parts. I have for the past 21 years. I have one wife of 31 years, going on 32. Have 3 wonderful children, 4 great grandkids. Everybody's healthy and we're doing fine.
How old are your children?
I have one 33, one 30, and one 26.
What do they do?
My son works for Fleetwood here in town. My daughter works for Coons Trim Shop. And my other daughter is homeschooling her 14-year-old daughter.
Sure. Okay, so what year were you born?
January 1st, 1948.
Okay, 1948. Born at Culver Hospital?
Culver Hospital, the old one.
Okay. And then you grew up in Waynetown.
Grew up in Crawfordsville.
Oh, okay.
But I actually went to school, grade school in St. Bernard's. And we graduated as such from the 8th grade, and my dad chose to move to Waynetown, and he started what was known as the Hilltop. And it was a truck stop, had a laundromat, real nice restaurant. We had a trailer court there, and I went through 4 years of school at Waynetown. Graduated in 1966.
Okay. So Joe Barton was in your class?
No, he was a couple of years ahead of me.
Okay, Joe's older.
Joe was older.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Waynetown. What was it like?
Joe Barton showed me everything that I wasn't supposed to learn.
Okay.
In fact, kind of a funny story about Joe Barton was that I got my draft papers in '67, and Joe had taken me out and showed me how to drink a beer or two. And he came in the station one night, and I was painting this truck. I just got through, and my dad was standing there, and he walked up to him, and he said, Ed, you want a beer? And Dad looked at him, and he said, Joe? And Joe looked back at Dad and said, Wally, if he's old enough to serve his country, he's old enough to drink a beer. And Dad said, let's all have a beer. And that was the first beer I drank with my father.
It's interesting. Was your father in the military at all?
Yeah, well, he was in World War II.
Which branch?
In his army.
Where was he stationed during World War II?
Kind of all over. He was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, really? Did he talk about it much?
Really, by the time he got interested in talking about it, his memory has slipped. He was a Jeep driver, and one thing he did tell me was one time that he was supposed to go out and in this Jeep, and he told them that it wasn't safe, and they never made it back, the people that took the Jeep. It was a suicide mission if there ever was one. He never did feel like that he'd done anything wrong, but he knew that things wasn't right, and the upper command decided it was.
Yeah. One of my neighbors who died about 2 years ago, his name was Bob Jones, and worked at R.R. Donnelly. He was in the Battle of the Bulge and talked about some of the stories. Similar to that, he was a Jeep driver. And in fact, in the middle of the battle, he was driving this officer around who got shot in the head, died right next to him. He really had difficulty getting over that incident. Any other relatives who were in the military?
My cousin Dennis Stewart, he's also a member of our group. He was in the Air Force. We was both in Vietnam about the same time.
Sure. Okay. What was high school like in Waynetown?
We was really close-knit. I think there was about 30 students in my class. I really didn't think I had much time for school because my dad had this garage and truck stop, and I was able to work on cars and enjoy myself doing that. So I wasn't an honor student by any means, but I graduated.
So once you graduated, you didn't get your draft notice right away?
It was just about a year.
About a year. Had you thought about enlisting rather than waiting for the draft?
No. I was engaged when I got out of school, And I went, never made any efforts to dodge the draft, but I would like to join the Guards.
Yeah.
And they said no, and I said fine. And
So you did try to join the National Guard unit here in Crawfordsville?
Yeah, there was 2 or 3 of us that went out and we tried to join Attica and Darlington and wherever. And the one, he was a classmate of mine, he managed to get in the Guards later, and he married my ex-fiancée.
Okay.
Everything worked out fine.
Interesting story. What were you feeling when you got your draft notice?
I was scared because you was starting to hear stories back here, and it definitely wasn't a very favorable war.
So this would have been what month in '67?
I got my notice in June. I left here July the 13th.
Okay, 1967. So you had heard some stories.
Oh, yeah.
Already there was media coverage that wasn't necessarily positive about what was going on. Did you know anyone who was in Vietnam?
Joe was
there.
In fact, Joe gave me my send-off party.
Okay. So Joe was back already?
He got back, yeah.
So did you talk to him before?
Yeah, he was a door gunner on a
Right.
helicopter. And I don't know, I think he was like, I feel like maybe jumping ahead a little bit. When I got home, he didn't want to talk about it because nobody knew how to communicate with him.
Sure. Where did you go for basic training?
I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Tell me a little bit about basic training. What were your impressions?
I thought it was the worst thing in the world, but I know today that it was probably one of the best things that ever happened.
So why did you think it was the worst thing in the world at the time?
I didn't understand why anybody'd make you run on rocks and barefooted and just because you didn't do something according to their rules. And I never did like to get up, so one morning I just barely got up and got out to formation, and it was too dark for anybody to see your beard, but my drill sergeant did. And he said, I want you to go back in, get your shaving gear, and come out here. Well, he said razor. So I got my shaving gear, and I came back out front, and he said, what are you doing with that shaving cream? He said, you won't be needing that. So I dry shaved. And he finally got me to where I could get up pretty well.
Okay. How long was basic? Do you remember?
I want to say it was 8 weeks.
Yeah, okay. 8 weeks. Fort Campbell, pretty good time of the year. The weather was okay,
Yeah,
right?
it was good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of the drill instructors, had they been in Vietnam?
Mm-hmm.
Did they talk to you about that as you're going through basic? No.
In fact, I think the atmosphere was to let you think that you was going to go to Germany or some place like that. It was kind of kept away from me.
So when you're in basic and everybody's trying to anticipate where they're going to go next, did you think you might end up in Vietnam, or where did you think you might end up?
I thought that was going to be the final resting place.
They didn't fool you in terms.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. When you came out of basic, you were assigned an MOS. What was your MOS?
11 Echo 40.
Which is?
Tank commander. It was tanks. I think it was actually 1120 at that time.
So you were in the tanks. Were you kind of surprised when you got that MOS?
Yes, I was. I was kind of happy too because I knew that could be Fort Knox. It could be a chance to stay stateside. You never knew.
So after basic, you got to leave for a couple of weeks, or did you go right on to AIT?
I think I went straight to AIT.
And where was your AIT at?
Fort Knox.
It was at Fort Knox. So tell me a little bit about AIT in tanks.
I found it pretty interesting. Liked heavy equipment. I liked the mechanics of anything that was mechanical. And I felt like if I was going to be in Vietnam, which everybody said that there wasn't many tanks in Vietnam, so you'd probably go to Germany, then I'd possibly rather be on a tank than on the ground.
So your title was tank commander?
Eventually.
Okay, eventually. What was the training like? What did you learn in
Well,
AIT?
AIT, it was driving the tank, loading the tank. There was really not much thought about being a tank commander because tank commander was filled by at least a Sergeant E5 and
Sure.
mostly Sergeant E6.
What kind of tanks were you learning on?
M48.
What's the name for an M48? Is there some sort of a name for it other than an
That was the only nomenclature.
M48? How many people in an M48?
4.
What are the different people?
And the driver, the loader, the gunner, and the tank commander.
So the loader's the guy loading the ammunition,
Right.
and you were learning to be a driver, or did you learn all the
I
jobs?
learned all positions, but it was kind of steered away from being a tank commander at that time. I think it was trying to give you a foundation for anything about
Sure.
the tank.
What was the difference between AIT and basic?
A little more for learning in AIT, basic definitely for discipline, and that was the foundation for all of it.
So, in a sense, AIT was much more of a learning experience, and at the time probably thought was more of a positive experience.
Right? You had more freedom.
Yeah.
I came home on the weekends.
Oh, you did? You came up. Now, how was that? I mean, you're coming home from Fort Knox. How many hour drive is it? 3 hour drive.
A little over 3.
So you were getting weekend passes coming home.
It was, I couldn't tell the speedometer. It had a 1 in front of it.
Okay. I mean, that was kind of strange. I mean, it was like having a job, wasn't it? That you were in the Army during the week and you come home on weekends.
Right.
And as it got closer to the end of the AIT, what were you feeling when you came home?
Things started happening real quick then, because I was approached, and for what reason I was approached, I have no idea. I never felt like I was a leader. But they told me that if I could take a test, and if I was to pass it, I could be accepted into an NCO academy. And I thought about it, and they said that that would probably put you in the slot of a tank commander. And I didn't know if I really wanted that kind of responsibility, because here I am, a draftee, no intention to stay in the service. And I decided to take the test, and I passed it. And there was like probably 65 of us that was accepted, and they gave us the option whether to take it or not, and I did. And upon going in, being accepted, I became Corporal E4. And I thought, now this is kind of neat. And it was to be a 12-week course, and it was going to be extensive learning on the tank, and you was going to be trained to be a tank commander.
And this was also at Fort Knox.
Fort Knox, yeah. We just moved over.
What, did they have a name in the military for these NCOs?
You got it.
What?
Instant NCO or shake and bake.
Shake and bakes. I remember hearing that one. Shake and bakes. So 12-week NCO. Did you also focus on some leadership skills?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. What kind of leadership skills did they?
We would march troops. That's what recently had a reunion, and some of the senior NCOs said that that was what we was the weakest at. They felt like we'd done our job other than that. Really, I can't see that we was a lot different than a first lieutenant would have been leading a platoon.
Yeah.
He virtually had about the same kind of training as we
Sure.
had.
Sure. There was no pressure on you that, okay, if you come out at NCO, we're gonna add another year onto your service commitment, because you wouldn't have done that if.
No. I wanted to come home.
Okay.
I wanted to do my job.
What was the atmosphere among the guys going through this NCO school? A lot of close-knit?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Real close. We also came home and we went to different people's buddies' homes on the weekend, and actually we had like 72-hour passes down there. So I went over in Chillicothe, Ohio with one of my friends, and he went to my house, and just a lot of good friendship.
Yeah. Do you stay in touch with those guys?
It's just happened in the last 4 years.
Really?
Mm.
How did it happen? Did someone just decide to get
Well,
you
I'd
guys
say Gary
together?
Bell was responsible for getting me to go to Kokomo. And I kept going up to Kokomo, and I, of course, had the red dot.
Right.
And you didn't see very many of them. And then finally, in the last 10 years, you'd start to see more and more and more. And I told Gary here a while back, I said, let's go up on Thursday, a day earlier, and we'll get more relaxed, and maybe enjoy it a little more. And he was all for it. And we did. And it was 4 years ago, on a Thursday, which normally we wouldn't have been there until Friday.
Right.
We're walking through the tent, and this guy's sitting back along the vendors, and he looked up and he said, "Shake and bake." And I turned around and looked at him, and I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Your name's Stewart." And it just, the feeling was unimaginable.
Yeah.
And I couldn't recognize him. And he said, "My name's Rosser." Well, we were in the first NCO class, so it was all in alphabetical order. And we was within a cubicle of each other, if not in the same cubicle,
Sure.
because there was 4 of us in a cubicle. Yeah. And he had seen this on the internet, flew in from California, and he told me when we left that weekend, he says, "We got to do something about this." He says, "I'm going to do something about it." Well, he got hooked up with a young lady that was an Army brat, and she told him, she says, "I can find anybody you want in 15 minutes on the computer." And he said, "No, you can't. Give me a name." And she punched out a name, and he got lucky that time. She gave him a telephone number, says, "Call this number." And he was talking to a member of his tank crew in 15 minutes.
Whoa.
And he kind of latched onto her and said, "We need you." And our first reunion was held at Fort Knox, Kentucky last year, not this year, but last year. And it was 125 of us showed up. There was 25 from my company, and we had four of us from my platoon.
Yeah.
We had the same reunion this year, but we had it in Louisville. Had less people, but new faces.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'll come back to that later when we get to the return group. Okay, so you do your 12 weeks NCO school, and then you get your orders for Vietnam?
No.
No? Where'd you go?
Went to Fort Carson, Colorado. And our mission there was to put together the 1st Battalion, 77th Armor, which was going to be part of the 5th Infantry Mechanized. And that's what we did.
How long were you there?
12 weeks.
Another 12 weeks. So in a sense, you were training yourselves, you were training other people, you're just getting equipment ready?
Yeah, most of the equipment was there. I don't
Yeah.
think it was taken to us.
Yeah.
Delivered to us in Vietnam. It was a training exercise. Some of it was simulated Vietnam style. We was thinking we was all going to be working in the jungle, but where we was at, it didn't turn out to be a lot of jungle.
Yeah.
The training was putting our actual crews together, and we had so many NCOs then. I was the gunner on the lieutenant's tank, and that only lasted 6 months when I got to Vietnam, and I got my own tank.
Now, so all of you guys went over to Vietnam together then?
Right.
Which is unusual.
And great.
Why? Tell us why it was great.
The camaraderie.
Yeah.
We had camaraderie that nobody else had, and we were a clean unit when we went in. Clean, I mean, we drank beer, but there wasn't any drugs. And to this day, I can say that I've never had the marijuana in my mouth,
Right.
nor do I ever have that.
Right. So in a sense, everybody had been together, pretty serious about this, and really concerned about fellow guys in the group.
Right.
Okay, now you get to Vietnam.
Yep. Well, we had a little interruption on that deal.
Okay.
Halfway through, riots, Chicago, Kent State,
Okay, so we're talking 68 here.
Right. And we stopped our training for Vietnam. We went into riot control training.
Really?
And we was with armed bayonets. We were told that if we go, we were probably going to be loaded ammunition. There wasn't one of us looking forward to this. This was probably scarier than when we jumped on a plane and went to Vietnam, because this was our own people.
Sure.
And these were people that's probably the same age as we are.
Yeah.
And we actually went on full alert, and we were loaded on an airplane, and it took off, and we was probably in the air about 15 minutes, and we felt it turn. And they said that the mission had been canceled, and we didn't have to go. And I am forever thankful for that. So
Was this during the riots at the Democratic Convention in the summer of '68, or was this after Martin Luther King's assassination?
It would have been the earlier part of '68.
Okay, so we're probably talking Martin Luther King assassination at that point. So that was scary.
Real scary.
You didn't join the army to become riot police. Okay, now we get to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, we're on our way.
So where did you leave from?
We left from Fort Carson and went, we landed in California. Can't remember the air base.
Travis? Right outside of Oakland, California?
That sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah.
We took just a cheap old military plane to there, and we got on a C-141, which I'm not a person that likes to fly, but once it was in the air, you didn't know you was flying. We sat backwards in it. All the plumbing was exposed on it. It wasn't a luxury cruiser, but it sure flew like one.
Did you stop anywhere? Where did you stop on your way?
We stopped in Hawaii, and we stopped in Guam.
When you stopped in Hawaii, did you see any people who had just gotten back from it? No.
It was late at night. They put us on a bus and took us to a mess hall, fed us, and we was right back out.
Okay, and then you stopped at Guam. Then when you came in country in Vietnam, where did you land?
It was down south, Cam Ranh Bay.
Cam Ranh Bay.
Right.
Okay, so you come into Cam Ranh Bay. First impression?
Really wasn't much of an impression there because it just looked like a busy place. We encountered no incoming. We was probably there about 2 hours, and we jumped on a real ragged C-131 that rattled and banged. I don't think it ever got straightened up, and we went to Da Nang.
Okay, so was that your permanent base of operations out of Da Nang, or?
Well, that's where we left from. We went to actually what was called Wonder Beach, and that's where our tanks came in on the ship.
Okay. So how long did you have to wait for your tanks to come in?
Tanks got there just real quick after we got there. Then we had to put them all together. All the gunnery was packed up, and they ran and drove off the ship, and that was about it.
How many tanks are we talking about here?
Probably right there in our area, we had about 45 of them.
Okay, so 45 tanks in this unit. Now, was this a new concept at the time to bring in this and develop this big tank unit?
Right, definitely.
Why? Why did they decide that this was going to be an approach to
Well, I
win
think
the
they
war?
tried to operate tanks down south, and it wasn't to their advantage as much as they thought it would be up there, because in the highlands up there, we had good traveling space. We could maneuver pretty well.
So, in your unit, you've got 45 tanks, and then you've got infantry along with it, or?
They would be attached to us, but we never trained with them.
Okay.
I won't say we never trained with them. They wasn't right there at our base camp.
So at this point, you're still not a tank commander?
No. I put the lieutenant's tank together, and I was the loader on his, the gunner.
Okay. And where exactly based? I mean, you mentioned Wonder Beach.
Yeah, Wonder Beach, we landed in Da Nang,
Right.
went to Wonder Beach, which is not too far from there.
Okay.
We put the tanks together, and we immediately headed out for Charlie 2, which was up by the DMZ. And that was gonna be pretty close to our base operation.
So you operated up in there. So talk a little bit about your mission up there.
Well, the first mission we had that I can recall, and there's a good chance that the logic that Gary Bell's put together is probably true. We were told that we were going to go through Conti, which was just north of Charlie 2, and we was going to go east. After we got there, we was actually going to be in the buffer of the DMZ, and they was telling us that there was no enemy contact up there. We just went up there and look around, but they wasn't telling us the truth. We had, I think it called Sparky or Parky. It was an airplane spotter, and he was telling us that we better kind of watch out for things that they found a Marine unit up there that was pinned down. And when we got there, we got into heavy fire. We didn't lose him, but he got wounded, my driver, which was on the lieutenant's tank. And he was shipped out for a while, got wounded in the back. We were all young kids that had no idea what we was getting into, but we grew up pretty quick, I think.
What was the concept? That you were supposed to go rescue people, or you go out on missions trying to make contact with the enemy, or you provide fire support?
It was kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
We definitely went out and rescued people, brought them back in when they was pinned down. We had missions of running mine sweeps. Over morning, we'd have to send a tank or two out.
Describe what you do on a mine sweep.
We would just pull mostly security for them while they was down there with the checking it. It would be the roads between our base camps so we could travel freely, because Charlie would slip in at night and he'd bury a mine, and right, being a GI, you know, we had to run over something that didn't look right. As you became a veteran over there, you learned how to get around some of that too.
Right. So when you go out on some of these missions, typically how many tanks would be together going out?
A lot of times it's just a platoon, 5 tanks.
5 tanks, yeah. And there'd be a platoon commander?
The lieutenant would be the platoon leader.
Yeah. And he's kind of directing, he's in one of the tanks.
Right. Which would be the 1-6 tank, which was my tank when I started over there.
Okay. And then he's kind of directing the rest of the tanks to do a variety of things. What's going on inside a tank on one of these missions? You've got 4 guys. What's everybody doing?
Well, the gunner in Vietnam wasn't like World War II, where he was down there scoping out the area, trying to find the enemy, which would have been a tank. I've actually never seen an enemy tank while we was over there, but a lot of times the loader would be on the outside of the tank, the gunner would be in the hatch right beside me, and I'd be in a cupola. The driver would take commands from me, where to go, what to do, and very seldom we buttoned up unless we made contact. Quite often the infantry would go with us. A lot of them liked to ride on it, but a lot of them didn't, because they were definitely a target when they was on it. They had, I think it was called a jumping Betsy, or the enemy would set and it would come up and then go off 4 or 5 foot in the air, which was they'd use against tanks. They had the RPG that they used against us.
Was that an effective anti-tank weapon?
Very.
Yeah.
Very. It would penetrate.
So if it penetrated, and the greatest danger inside a tank was what?
If it penetrated, bouncing off ammunition and setting it off, then you hit a fire after a lot of explosions.
Yeah. Yeah.
That and landmines.
Yeah.
I hit 2 landmines while I was there.
Typically, if you hit a landmine, it would also penetrate the tank or blow off the track, or?
Normally that would have been a command detonated that would go through it. That'd be where you would drive your track over it, and the enemy is sitting out there, and he would command detonate it. We had fears of it at first because the original tank we had was the M48 was gas, and later in our tour over there we got the M48A1, which was the very same tank, same weaponry, but it was a diesel. Normally you hit a landmine, it was pressure detonated, and it would blow the whole track off. Road wheels that there's no way that I could pick up two of them together, would go 150 feet in the air. And you thought you was dead by the time that tank dropped back down.
Yeah.
You bounced around in that cupola.
Yeah. So after 6 months, you become a tank commander. And that occurred why?
In Vietnam?
Yeah.
Actually about 6 weeks.
6 weeks you
Yeah.
became a tank.
The one of our instant NCOs was on tank 1-5, and he went to the lieutenant and said he didn't think that he could handle it. And he chose to put me on it, on his tank, and he became the loader on 1-6. It was really frightening to think that, you know, I have 3 guys here.
Right.
I actually had 2 when I was on the lieutenant's tank.
Right.
And then you almost had to take care of the lieutenant too, because he was green just like all of us.
Second lieutenant or first
He
lieutenant?
was the second when he came to us. Very green.
Very good. Tell me, I mean, you read a lot of stories about second lieutenants coming into Vietnam, getting hurt, getting killed quickly once they arrive. Some of them aren't very good, and some of them are pretty good. What was your second lieutenant like? Was he pretty strong?
I thought he was, yeah.
Yeah. He wasn't a military academy guy or anything like that, was he? From West Point or?
No, it was OCS.
Yeah.
I just visited with him this year, and he stayed in. He told us down there that he felt safer with us than he probably would have with some veterans, seasoned veterans, because the knowledge that we had was fresh in our mind.
Yeah.
We was throwing a lot of information in a short time, but most of it you could remember, because somewhere during the training you realized that you probably was going to have to use it.
Sure. What was the secret to being a good tank commander? What do you need to do to be a good tank commander?
Well, I think you had to at least show your men that you was in charge. Couldn't tolerate drugs, which, like I said, we didn't have a problem. Problem came with rotation. 6 months through, they rotated half of us out. And I was fortunate enough to stay with the unit the entire time. And the rotation was so that the whole unit wouldn't have to be replaced a year later when it was time for us all to leave. You had to be on the lookout. You had to be sure you trained those guys that you had with you to have their eyes open all the time to tell you anything they thought was suspicious. Normally we were blessed when we was in our own platoon with leadership that worked out real well. I thought we performed our job pretty well.
Yeah. Did it make sense to be using tanks in Vietnam? I mean, was that a sound military strategy?
I didn't think so when we went over there. I think we were very successful. I think we kicked some butt. But Charlie, when we first got over there, his big deal was going to be get close enough to us and put an RPG through us. And that had us all frightened. Towards the end, I got them RPGs. I had 7 of them in my tank. It probably wasn't sound, but I think they were grasping for straws, and they was wanting to cut the enemy off at the DMZ.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could probably do that probably as well as anybody could.
So you were basically encountering NVA North Vietnamese Army coming across the DMZ. So one of your basic tasks was to stop the flow of manpower coming in from the north and material. So you were kind of patrolling that DMZ.
Yeah, basically just from our base camps.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't just go up and
Right,
down.
right.
We usually make contact when we done now.
Yeah. Any key experiences that stand out during this time? I mean, something either good or bad or whatever, some things that...
Well, I referred to a while ago to Gary Bell.
Right.
He got wounded over there.
Right.
And he was attached to the Marines and medic. And that day, he said that they were pinned down, and he said to him it was like a John Wayne movie. He said you could see the antennas flopping, and you could hear the clack of the track. And he said that he got on the back of a tank, and he believes that it was one of our tanks.
Really?
It probably wasn't my tank,
Right.
but we brought him out of there.
Hmm.
And you know, I didn't even know him at the time.
Sure.
Didn't know him for 10 years or better.
Yeah.
When I got home, other than I knew he was a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty rewarding, and until these recent reunions, I didn't realize how special the guys that I served
Sure.
with was.
Sure. What was your closest call you had?
It was the last time I went out. It was April 25th or April 26th. We had opened up the road to go back into Quezon. And to me, it was one of the stupidest missions we ever went on.
Now, was this after all of the bombing at Quezon, the siege of Quezon
Right.
and the Marines there?
Mhm.
So you're opening up the road.
Right. Yeah, it had trees knocked down, and part of the road was gone. We had a bulldozer with us that leveled the road out, and it was a night mission to go in, and we was going along the mountains, and it was straight up. There was no way we could fire our main guns high enough if they'd have been up there firing down on us.
Sure.
We go in there, and we spend a week in there. No contact at all. Didn't even hit a landmine. And they had told us that we was going to spend probably one more night there, and we would be heading back to base camp. And that night, a good friend of mine that I went to the NCO Academy, his tank was broke down. So I got detached from my platoon and had to fill in with his platoon. That same day, which I don't remember this happening, their platoon sergeant got rotated out. So here they are with virtually no platoon sergeant, because it was one like me, it was an instant NCO.
Right.
We had a second lieutenant, and we was with the South Vietnamese. We had a regiment of them up there. I don't know that it was really a regiment, but they was supposed to be in charge of this. And we set up our tank where they wanted us to, and I told them I didn't like it. And one of my crew members said, we got movement over there on the hillside. This was before dark. So I called him, the lieutenant, and told him. And he walks over and he looks and he said, "You guys are seeing things." Well, we called him back, told him again. He said, "You're seeing things." And I kind of had to let it go that way, because there wasn't nothing we could do. You know, he was the top gun. And nighttime came upon us, and I was asleep on the back deck of the tank, and my loader was on duty, and this loader he'd been with us about 90 days. Came in real sloppy, no desire to do things right, and it was my job to straighten him out, and I worked pretty hard at it. I was rough on him at times, but he was starting to come around, and he was doing a good job. And he nicknamed me Daddy, and all we ever called him was Shorty. And he called this second lieutenant without waking me up, and he said, "I got movement out front." The lieutenant said, "We got an outpost out there." He said, "If it's an outpost, why is it moving?" He said, "Don't worry about it, it's an outpost." 5 or 10 minutes later, Shorty called him back. He said, I have definitely got movement out here. We need to do something. And other people had told me the conversation after the fact.
Yeah.
So he set off a trip flare. They believe came from my tank, which he would have set it off. And when he set it off, the first round hit, and I'm sure it hit him because they had us zeroed in pretty good. And we went through pure hell for probably 3 or 4 hours. When I came to, I was hanging off the back of the tank, concussion from the first round. And I went underneath. The other 2 guys was on the ground in a lean-to. They was okay, and they got underneath the tank. They had the M16 and ammunition, and they was fine underneath. I got back on the tank. And the main round that we had that would do any good against troops on the ground was a canister. And we usually carried about 10 of them. And when I got in there, I knew that Shorty was gone. And to this day, I don't know what he looked like. I don't want to know what he looked like. But I moved him so that he would be out of the way. And I just put the gun down, just pitch dark, and started firing a canister. And I would traverse the turret from side to side, and I fired up everything we had. I didn't throw shell casings out or anything. Well then, all my ammunition that I could do any good with, anything else has been heat or something like that. And these were all close range troops. So I got back under the tank to check on the other guys, and I said, give me the M16. And both of them said, we're out of ammunition. And to this day, I can hear them say that, but I didn't respond to it. I said, give me the M16. And about that time, I looked over to the right of the tank, the left of the tank, and we got enemy standing there. And he heard me, and he took the gun and went right in between the road wheels, and he just turned it loose, and we all hugged the ground. I personally could have got us all killed by hollering at him, but I had no idea that it was that close either. And he just fired it, and you could see sparks flying and smell the gunpowder, and he pulled it away, and none of us got hit. And the fighting probably went on for another 20 minutes after that, and they pulled out what was left of them. The canister rounds worked that night. I was told that there was somewhere around 30 casualties in front of us.
How many casualties did your platoon suffer? Do you know?
Just my platoon. I was the only tank in my platoon.
Right. Oh, okay.
It was just the one, which was Shorty.
Yeah.
But we did lose one other on the other side, which they just got the overfire.
Yeah.
The enemy didn't attack them from that side, which was where we was expecting it, because we figured they'd come in from Laos. But they came in from the Vietnam side and hit us. We had one other, I think he was a driver that was killed.
So give me a date on this. This is April 1968.
Yeah, the date was a little confusing, but the report that I read last year was 25th or 26th.
Okay. And this is how many months into your tour?
That would have been about 9.
Okay.
I only served 11 months over there because I was due to ETS out.
So you got it. Okay. So your 2 years was coming up while you were in Vietnam?
Right. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. So after this, you still stayed out in the field, or?
No, I went back because I was wounded. Both eardrums were bursted, shrapnel. Went to the hospital ship, spent some time out there.
Tell me a little bit about that experience. So were you medevaced out of the area where the firefight took place?
It was daylight. Great big hole looking chopper come in. Probably the most terrible ride of my life because we had to go back. I was sent out on the first chopper that came in, and it had a lot of it had our dead.
Right, right.
And as I was sitting there, here's the boot hanging out, and it was shocking.
Okay. Taken back to where? To Da Nang?
I would say it probably was. That part's not very clear.
Yeah. And then from there you were taken to a hospital ship.
Well, from there I was taken back to base camp because what they did, they was afraid of poison from any kind of shrapnel that our enemy had, and they left the wounds open.
Mm.
And at base camp, I was told that they would sew it up in, I think it was 3 or 4 days or something like that, but they wanted to leave everything open. And I went to, they come over and got me in a Jeep and said, we want to go over and sew you up now. And I said, okay. They took me over. I was pretty stiff and moving pretty slow. Had a pretty good gash in the shoulder over here. And got over there, and this, I never will forget it. I think it was probably a corporal, but he started sewing me up, and I could just feel him going like that. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, Sarge, I hope I don't hurt you, because this is OJT. And that was one of his first ones, and it didn't hold. It come apart. Mm-hmm. He was trying his best, and everything still worked out all right.
So you were awarded a Purple Heart. Did they give it to you while you were in Vietnam?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I think I got everything when I got home.
What else were you awarded in addition to a Purple Heart?
The Bronze Star, Army Accommodation Medal.
Sure.
That's basically what.
Yeah. Okay, so eventually you do go to a hospital ship?
Right.
Okay. And where was the hospital ship?
It was just off the coast, not very far. We went out in a chopper.
Okay.
We was talking about the names of them ships, and I couldn't remember which one it was. I spent 2 or 3 days out there, and most of it was over my ears and fear of infection setting up.
Yeah. And then from there, where did you go?
I went back to base, and I went to the platoon sergeant, and I told him, I said, if you tell me I'm going out, I'm going out. But what I seen that night, and the fact that I lost a real good friend,
sure,
I don't know that I can command the troops right now.
Right.
And first sergeant come over, he found out about it and come over, and he says, I got a couple of jobs I can get you to do. And I set up a little, I wouldn't call it an NCO, it was an enlisted man's club, and got it going before I left.
Okay. Coming back, you flew out of Da Nang again?
We were Jeep to Da Nang, and then we flew back down to Cam Ranh Bay.
And then out of Cam Ranh, you came home.
Came home on a commercial jet.
Okay, tell me what the atmosphere was like in that commercial jet once it took off.
It was, you couldn't hear a pin drop. And for what reason this pilot thought we needed to see Vietnam again, as he flew up, he took us down the coast or up the coast, and nobody said anything. I mean, we even had good-looking stewardess to look at, and we wasn't wanting to look at them at the time. And finally he turned, and when he turned, you could hear everybody. Yeah. We were quite a sigh of relief. Yeah. We flew to Japan then.
Immediate feelings. I'm proud of what I did. Gee, I don't know whether this was worth my year and going through this traumatic experience. What were you thinking on the plane?
On the plane?
Yeah.
I was proud of what I did. I felt confident that my mother and father was going to be very proud of me.
Yeah.
I didn't know how either one of them would take the fact that I'd been wounded, because I didn't tell them. Wanted to go on with my life.
Sure.
Really wanted to talk to somebody that I could talk to about it, which was to no avail.
So you're sitting next to people on the plane that you didn't know at all, or did you? Did you know anybody on the plane?
Probably not very many. No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Stopped on the way back. Where did you stop on the way back?
Japan.
Japan. And then flew back into
Seattle, Washington.
Seattle. Fort Lewis.
Right.
Yeah. So then you out-processed out of the military at Fort Lewis?
Very quickly.
You got your free steak dinner? Did you get your free steak?
Yeah.
And then you went through the process and they gave you a dress uniform, right? Did they?
Right.
Yeah. And then you got on another commercial plane to fly home.
Right. I was on my own then.
When you were at the airport, getting on that commercial plane, Anybody looking at you in funny ways or any?
You know, I don't believe I recall anything that was out of the way.
No comments or anything
No.
like that?
Not at all.
How about on the plane? Were there any other military guys on the plane?
I'm sure there was, but I don't think there was a lot.
Yeah. And where did you fly into? Into Chicago? And then how'd you get down here to home?
Got on an old rattly prop and rode the rest of the way and didn't know if I was going to make it.
Yeah, that was probably the scariest part of the tour. Right? Now your mom and dad knew you were coming home.
Yeah, I called my dad on a Saturday night. I had a tandem dump truck when I left the service. And my dad knew enough about me that when I went on R&R, I told him in a letter that I was going to call him. And my aunt had called and was talking to my mother, and he went in and said, the conversation's over, and he hung up the telephone on him. And within 10 minutes, I called him. And my dad answered the phone from when I called him in Seattle, and I threw him off. I said, what's the chances of getting me a load of gravel hauled tomorrow? And he said, tomorrow's Sunday. And I said, Dad, I'd kind of like to have it hauled out to California. And we both cried pretty good.
Yeah.
He knew it all then.
Yeah.
And he said, when are you going to be home?
Yeah. I forgot to ask, where did you go on R&R when you were in?
To Bangkok, Thailand.
Midway through the tour, was it midway?
Yeah.
How was that? I mean, did that make sense to be out in the combat areas and then suddenly you're in Bangkok, Thailand?
No, it didn't make sense, but it was very rewarding. I think it was something we all needed.
Yeah.
It was a good break.
Was it tough coming back though, after having that week in Bangkok?
No, because of the people you came back to.
Yeah.
I mean,
So you were anxious to get back to see your friends
right,
back in the unit. Did you feel guilty at all leaving them?
No, I don't think so, because I'd already seen them do it, and I'd seen them come back happy.
Okay.
I think it worked.
How about when you left Vietnam? Were you feeling guilty about leaving those guys?
A little bit, but I knew that the ones that I'd been with all the time, they were short.
Yeah.
I knew something could happen to them. Probably would have liked to stay in contact with them. I know
Sure.
I would have liked to.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would have been good for them or good for us at the time.
Did you have a short timers calendar when you were?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we marked it.
Okay. Okay, you get back to Wayne-town.
No, when I got back, Mom and Dad moved back to town.
Oh, they were back here in Crawfordsville.
Right.
Okay, so you come into Crawfordsville. How'd you spend the first week back in Crawfordsville?
With Mom and Dad. Stayed pretty close. I had a good friend that was due to come back soon. In fact, he volunteered for the draft so he could go in the same day I did.
Yeah.
He went to Germany. I knew my cousin would be coming back soon, and I think probably within a week they had a big party for me out at Melvin Park.
How did you feel that the town responded to you? I
They
mean,
didn't want to hear about it. They really didn't want to hear about it.
I mean, Joe told us a little bit about going into a bar in Wayne-town and some people making some comments to him about being in the war, and they weren't very nice comments.
I was blessed. That
Yeah.
never happened to me.
Yeah.
I know I've heard stories, people throwing tomatoes at them and all that, but my disconnection from military service was really good.
Did you have flashbacks?
Yeah. I put my wife through pure hell.
How soon after you got back did you get married?
We got married in February of 70, so not long after.
And, I mean, prior to getting married, did you talk to her about your experience over there? No. She just knew you'd been in Vietnam and that was about it.
And it wasn't that big a thing because nobody knew that a Vietnam veteran was going to have problems.
Right.
You know, they thought we just fell back into society,
Right.
and we probably thought the same thing.
So at that point, where were you working? For your dad, or?
No, I drove a dump truck for a while,
Okay.
and I decided I wanted out of it, and I took over a Citgo station down here on the corner of Market and Washington. I ran it for about 3 years.
Did you make, well, you said that you put your wife through pure hell. I mean, once into the marriage and you're having some of these flashbacks and having some of these issues.
She resorted to drinking.
Yeah.
I had done way too much drinking. She said that I would wake up cold sweat and screaming. I can remember waking up.
Was there anything that set it off? I mean,
I don't think so. At first, any kind of an explosion was tough. I mean, you would probably try to grab the ground.
right.
I think I adjusted to it pretty quick because I think I realized that people didn't want to see us do that because they wasn't educated to the fact of what we'd been through. That, you know, we were really American veterans, and they didn't treat us that way.
Once you got back, did you continue to keep track of what was going on in Vietnam? I mean, did you read the newspapers about it and watch
I don't
the
think
news?
so.
Yeah.
I feel like, to sum up my last 30 years, 35 years, that I spent the first 10 years trying to forget Vietnam.
Sure.
Ronald Reagan come along, and I might have even lost the cold chill that you get when you hear the national anthem, and he gave me all that back.
Yeah.
And I'm forever grateful.
So basically, from 70 through 1980, it's just West Central Vietnam vets weren't organized yet. So you're just kind of living your life on your own, dealing with these issues by yourself. Occasionally meet another vet and talk, or
I don't think
no?
so.
No. Okay. When did the West Central Vietnam Vets Group start?
It was the early 80s,
Yeah.
but I wasn't in on the first round of it because I didn't want to be.
Right.
I didn't think I was ready for any part of it. My cousin called me 2 or 3 times and said, come down. And one night he called me. I told him I probably would, and I didn't show up. He called me, and he said, come on down. So I just walked in down there. There was several members there, and they was trying to talk about the bad times as well as the good times. And I thought, I don't need this. And I started to pull away, and then I figured, well, I'll just join.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined, and I went through about the same thing I did when I got home. And my wife said, this was supposed to help you. What's wrong? And we was able to work through it. And unfortunately, over some beer and sitting talking to guys that wanted to talk about something else besides the blood part of it, I think I started to come back around.
You know, probably beginning in about the mid-70s, they were beginning to do research about what Vietnam veterans were going through, and they came up with the post-Vietnam stress syndrome and all of that.
Right.
I mean, did you read any articles about that and think, you know, I've got some of these symptoms? And
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I was just looking to stay away from all of it.
okay.
I really just don't think that I cared that I was ever there until Ronald Reagan told me I was all right to be there.
So that was a turning point. And the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was a turning point too.
Definitely. That was one of the first things I'd done with the group. It was.
So you guys all went out there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was about 10 or 11 of us went out.
What was your experience when you got there?
We seen a lot of tears. We seen a lot of emotions. I seen my loader.
Yeah.
In
So Shorty's name's up
Seen
on the
his
wall.
name, but I seen him too.
Yeah.
He was there. And I'm sure I seen it all.
Yeah.
I seen explosions and relived part of it
Yeah.
pretty quickly.
But you're there with people who understand, so it's a
Right.
lot easier to kind of go through this experience. There was a lot of controversy about the memorial. I mean, initially veterans thought, well, it's black and it's underground and it just kind of represents American attitude towards Vietnam. Did you feel that way, or did you see it in a different light?
No, I seen those lives there. That was what was important. And it's a black time in our history, so
Yeah.
appropriately it would be black.
Yeah, yeah. How many times have you been to it?
Three times.
Do you get the same feeling every time you go back?
Probably not quite as emotional,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel it all. Even at the moving wall.
Yeah, the moving wall that was here in Crawfordsville, what, probably about 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah, something like that.
That was, I remember the candlelight service
Right.
that night was pretty impressive.
Did you remember how windy it was?
It was windy. That's right.
And when the services started, the wind stopped.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was the night
Absolutely.
we lost John Legacy that day.
Uh,
He was a member of our group.
Yeah, that's right. Looking back on the experience, I mean, do you see it now and say, you know, it was an important experience in my life. I've kind of grown as a result of it. I don't regret going, or what are your feelings?
I definitely don't regret going. If I'd have went to the National Guards, I know that in my mind I would have known I was hiding from it.
Yeah.
Met some of the greatest people in the world, had great experiences with them. Definitely grew up pretty quick, maybe a little quicker than I should have. Probably my whole life would have unfolded a lot slower if I hadn't done it. I personally don't believe at this time that I would have got married when I did. I think that was probably bad for both of us. We seem to have survived it, but I don't feel like it was the right time.
Sure.
I think I'd done it to get off the street and maybe prevent having an accident out drinking or something.
Right. Do you talk with your children about your experiences in Vietnam? Do they ask questions?
No, my grandkids do.
They do?
My oldest granddaughter, she has started doing that.
So how do you feel about someone asking the question? Do you want to talk to them about it? Or
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's healthy.
Okay. Why don't you think your kids asked you a lot of questions?
I think they've probably seen part of it. The life that I lived for 10 years. I know my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter did. My son didn't see a lot of it.
Yeah.
I think they know it wasn't pretty.
Sure. Do you ever talk with any student groups, high school?
Never have, because I never felt comfortable speaking in front of a group.
Yeah.
I seem to have done more of it lately, but in a sense, but always has shook me up.
Sure. Any final comments? I mean, we've talked for about an hour. Anything you want to say?
No, I think that the main thing is that I'm very, very proud to be a Vietnam veteran, and I'm very, very proud of this group that we have around here.
Sure.
I think if you lived in a different community, you probably wouldn't see the camaraderie that you see here. It's still organized. I mean, we're not as strong as we were, but we still get to do the things that we enjoy now. And donating this money to the charitable organizations, I feel just real great about that.
Yeah, it's really neat.
And
are some of the Vietnam veterans groups in other areas kind of falling apart?
I think so. And I think we've kind of followed suit, but
there's still. Why do you think you still have a pretty strong core to this group?
I think we let each other be friends.
Yeah.
The group that I went back to Fort Knox to see, one of their wives made the comments that it was just like you guys never missed this 33 or 4 years. You just took over and you're out and going again. You're not missing a beat.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of connection there. And
so you guys plan to get together?
Hopefully every year. But
really?
They're trying to cut it back to every other year.
Yeah.
But the thing that was nice about serving with someone that you knew was that this guy's got a piece of the puzzle that you've been trying to find.
Sure.
And I found the address on my loader that I wanted to go see him, or see his parents. It seems to be kind of a phony address right now because we can't find it. It's in Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah.
But it's not on the map in the internet, and I've even went back to 66 maps and I haven't found it. But we're not going to quit trying.
Sure. Well, I hope you do. I think we'll end it.
Very good.
Okay.
Very good.